With all of these trips, I feel like they're such special and unique locations. Like they're oftentimes just coincidentally bucket list destinations. So be it Angkor Wat in Cambodia or Machu Picchu in Peru, or in Rwanda, there's an option to go gorilla trekking as well. And so it's like these once in a lifetime experiences that you can have with us, all while supporting girls' education.
I just think you've come upon the recipe of the future, how we do good in the world and do good for ourselves at the same time. Hello, and welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, where you'll hear one aha moment after another. In this podcast, we're shining a light on an enormous wave of goodness and progress well underway in the world that almost no one knows about yet. In fact, I think it's so hidden by the negative noise in society, all the doom and gloom, that we're calling this wave of goodness and progress a conspiracy of goodness. So here you are in the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, and our mothership website is called the Goodness Exchange. So if you like what you hear here and you want more of this feeling of possibility that we bring you, head over to the Goodness Exchange and you can find thousands of articles and links and more recordings with people who are actually tackling some of the world's most vexing problems, large and small. And here's the thing, like our guest today, they still think the future is bright. And I look at these interviews and the things that they're accomplishing progress in, and I think anything is possible. So we need to know what they know. We need to know how they look at setbacks and as opportunity. And on this podcast, you're going to hear what's right with the world. And we can get started on that right now with today's guest, Jordan Ashley. Jordan, welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Well, I am delighted. Jordan and I had an extraordinary conversation recently where it was the middle of the night for her. She's in London and I'm in the United States in Vermont. And she is taking care of an ailing older dog. And despite the bags under her eyes, she was effervescent. She was passionate. She's an idea person who absolutely inspired me. I said, oh, I gotta interview you in the next week. So here we are. Thanks for being so flexible.
Thank you so much. And yeah, that was not my finest moment, but I'm glad that I left a somewhat of a decent first impression. So that's good to know.
You were lovely. Let me share just a few things with people so they know where we're starting at and they get the gist of why I knew instantly we needed to have you on the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. So Jordan was a New York City dweller in that fast-paced yoga culture there, and she recognized this opportunity for people interested in yoga to expand what good could come of their practice. And this is just one of my favorite things to shine a light on at the Goodness Exchange in general, is people who connect to things that no one ever thought to connect. So Jordan's zone of genius comes in looking at this yoga practice that she had and the expertise and connecting it to her lifetime of world travel. She did a study abroad in Cambodia and I think India. And then she was a reporter, a journalist, and all through Southeast Asia for a while. So she had this background in global travel. And then she had the heart for doing something about a problem in the world that got her passionate. And that's girls' education, or rather lack thereof, girls' education in the world. So she creates travel opportunities for people where yoga not only inspires the person who you are and what all the practice of yoga brings to you as an individual, but it also does good in the world at the same time. Her organization, Souljourn Yoga, creates travel experiences for people where you go somewhere inspiring to do yoga, and then you're also connected to primarily local organizations that are seeing to it that girls get education. I'm sure you can explain this much better than I have, Jordan, and I'm going to give you all the opportunity in the world to do this, but it sounded lovely. I mean, within 10 minutes, I wanted to go on one of these journeys with her. She's been featured in Forbes magazine, Yoga Journal, the Los Angeles Times, Marie Claire UK. And this is the best example of finding what you are uniquely built to contribute. I know that listeners of this podcast will hear me say that over and over again, but we really believe that that's what we're meant to do. And we're all on a journey to discover that. And if you're wondering what you're uniquely built to contribute, or you've found it, you're going to love Jordan's story. So welcome, Jordan. I thank you so much for taking your time out to be with us today. Tell us more about your story.
Wow, it's like where to begin? I guess in terms of travel, like that's for me has been like the biggest, not only like mind opener, but also heart opener. And I know that's something that we touched on. Like I wasn't someone who like really traveled a lot as a kid, like here and there, like a couple family, vacations and whatnot. And I even like at some point in time, I like couldn't even do sleepovers anymore. Like I really like just was like a total homebody. And so my whole family was completely like shocked when I like went across country and moved to New York for undergrad. And I literally moved the day after I graduated. Like I couldn't wait to get out and to start my own journey and start my own adventure and really find myself and not have, my identity be defined by my past or my family or any of that. And so I think that kind of initial like summer, it was summer 2007 and just being by myself in New York, and I worked retail and I had a little studio apartment in Alphabet City. And yeah, I just kind of loved being on my own and it felt really good and I felt really confident. And, from there, I decided to go to India on a yoga retreat, like very, very, very randomly. And that was a life-changing moment because I never had done that kind of travel before. And we were saying, the other evening, like India is, if you've never done that kind of travel before, like India will break you open and it will make you, it's like complete culture shock, for lack of a better word.
And then you have this heart for the world of girls' education, or the hardships that girls who are not getting education experience in the world. So you brought in the yoga aspect, the travel aspect. Where did that fit in?
So during my study abroad programs, the one in Cambodia in particular, so that came after the India yoga retreat, which was amazing. I've been back to India several times. As you said, I even later did study abroad there because I loved it so much and I've ended up feeling like absolutely so at home there. But in Cambodia, I was living with this amazing woman. She's a foundation. Her name's Ponhiri Lee. It's the Ponhiri Lee Foundation. She's a survivor of the Khmer Rouge, and her father was executed during Pol Pot's regime. And he was an educator. And so her whole life's mission as a survivor has been to bring back the education of the youth to Siem Reap. She's a CNN hero. She's a fantastic, fantastic person. And so living with her in her guest house and being able to volunteer at the different schools that she supports and being able to see firsthand how she was making such a huge difference. And in particular, I think connecting to the young female students as well and seeing a part of myself in them, which I think oftentimes as women, it's easy to connect and see, all of the potential and everything in a young girl. Just completely like planted the seed for, I guess, how the trajectory of the rest of my 20s into my 30s would go with then starting my own foundation. And the amazing part is that now Ponhiri Lee Foundation is one of Souljourn Yoga's partners, and we do retreats to Cambodia and support Ponhiri Lee Foundation. And we get to work in the schools. Yeah, great.
Yes, that is what I found really inspiring. There's so many things. We're going to get to them all here. But one of the things I found very inspiring was that you make partnerships in certain places around the world, and you're not just going to be a one-hit wonder in people's lives. And if people who go on your retreats, they are not going to be just a one-hit wonder. Their impact is going to be multiples. It's going to be amplified over time. So share with us how that whole part of the equation works for Souljourn.
So yeah, just to bring it all together. So I did study abroad, majored in journalism, did journalism, and once again was living with her and volunteering part-time when I wasn't writing articles. And in that period of time, I did NGO coverage. So looking firsthand about how different on the ground grassroots organizations were operating. And so I came back to New York. I was freelancing. I was teaching yoga. I had done my yoga teacher training after I graduated university and was teaching at different studios, and noticed how there was a lot of talk and very little action behind people's intentions in terms of doing anything like altruistic. And these are people who are claiming to be yogis or senior yoga teachers or yoga teachers, et cetera, et cetera. And it really bothered me and it really upset me, especially because so many of these people were doing retreats in countries where a lot of support could be given, be it bringing school supplies or sanitary napkins or, even including a donation into the retreat price or having some kind of like cultural immersion or connecting with locals or education or learning about the history. And so that to me, the beginning of wanting to create my own platform, and that's through Souljourn Yoga. So it's a play off the word sojourn, so an abbreviated travel. So using travel, yoga, the idea of union and bringing people together as a way to fund and support girls' education on the ground. So we include a $300 to $500 US tax deductible donation that goes directly to our partner organization. So in that regard, we're like an intermediary organization. And then participants get to connect and meet and learn all about the young women who we are supporting.
It's just a beautiful example of how we are going to go forward. I'm absolutely sure of it on this planet, is that people like you are going to find what you're uniquely built to contribute. You're going to put the 3 or 4 or 5 things together that you are a kind of an expert generalist at. And because I don't hear you telling me that you were the yoga teacher of the universe, or necessarily the traveler of the universe, or necessarily the charitable mind of the universe. But when you put all 3 together, you created something that never existed before you and will change the future of people's lives.
It's been really amazing and really humbling, especially because we have long-term relationships with our partner organizations, and that we're visiting the same places. Pre-COVID, it was pretty much annual, if not like every other year. And so we're all about going deep and not wide with these relationships with these different communities, because it's very easy to plan a retreat and say, this year we're going here and the next year we'll go there and blah, 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 blah. But for me, it's not about that. It's really about having sustainable impact. And so you can actually watch these young women, progress out of the dormitories. A lot of them are in dormitories, and then onto university. And now the next tier that we've done and that we've created is we're actually doing our own yoga teacher trainings for these women and teenage girls in these communities.
So you're leaving them with either ways to become leaders in their communities or have a business of their own.
Exactly. 100%. It's all about that, because it's amazing and fantastic that, that they're able to do like a yoga class with us or an art workshop. It didn't really seem fair to me that maybe if no other volunteers or no one else comes in, probably also too, because they're really, swamped with school and their studies and their academic pressures, because it's quite rigorous, they're not necessarily going to like seek out this practice, which honestly, what I've learned thus far, it's been extremely supportive for them in terms of giving them different skill sets and different tools to combat stress. And that was seen in our first teacher training in Rwanda during COVID in terms of isolation and the women having a meditation practice that they gravitated to. And now I'm also seeing that with the teenage girls that I'm working with in Morocco in the High Atlas Mountains. They're 15 and 16, and they have a tremendous amount of pressure for them in terms of succeeding and graduating and, going to university and jobs and creating that kind of prosperity for not only themselves, but their families as well.
Oh, yeah. You pointed out something to me the other day that I thought was I could think of about a half dozen lines of impact that folks who go on your trips are being a part of it. But one of the things that you pointed out I thought was interesting was that girls just getting an education is half the problem in some places. But then let's say they're lucky enough to get an education. I never thought about this, but it makes perfect sense. They're often under so much pressure to create the economic trickle down from their education throughout their whole family or their communities.
Yeah, it's mind blowing, and you can sense it and you can feel it once you start to have relationships and friendships with them, and they open up and tell you about the kinds of stressors that they have. And I was in Morocco over the summer because part of my PhD work is looking at yoga as an embodiment practice for empowerment for teen girls in the High Atlas Mountains in Morocco. And I was asking them, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, like, how stressed are you? And they were 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest. And in that moment, it was pretty low because it was summer holiday. And I'm like, what makes you stressed? And they each said exams. And it's like, okay, right. Because it's just an immense amount of pressure, that the fact that they've been accepted into these pretty incredible NGOs that have dormitories and tutoring and all kinds of different safety nets for them, so they do have backing in that way, but then also to be able to get good marks and to really like live up to, not only the community and their families' expectations, but their own expectations. Like so much of that pressure comes from within.
And then there's yoga. I mean, it's a complete circle. I mean, the practice itself, there was a time in my life, not recently because of a broken arm and a broken leg, but where I never missed 40 minutes every day. And I wouldn't say I was accomplished by any means, but it did become a part of my life that I would never miss because of all the additive things that I can imagine these girls are accessing, just like somebody busy in New York City or Vermont like me. I mean, that's the cool part about yoga, right? We can all access its magic.
I think so. And, honestly, for me, like the physical practice, like the asana, like that was the gateway. And I think that is for a lot of people as well. But as I've gotten more invested into Souljourn yoga and the charity and really using this idea of yoga or union about, human connection and about, seeing the best in our humanity, I've kind of left a lot of the physical practice at the door because I don't need it in the same way that I used to. I also have like a bunch of injuries as well. And I remember being younger and feeling really isolated at some of the different studios that I practiced in because like I couldn't do whatever insane inversion or arm balance or just because like I have an impinged like right hip and a bone spur. And unless that gets shaved off, like there's no way I can even do like a straddle, like forward fold. Like, anyway, probably like TMI, but I think for a lot of people, even like getting to the mat can feel like really daunting and really scary and really inaccessible. And my whole thing is like, let's like decentralize it. Let's make it as open and accessible for anyone and for anyone to teach it. Like my whole thing is you don't have to spend 200 hours and spend thousands and thousands of dollars to pay like a studio's rent, because that's where the majority of the, money goes for teacher training. Like you could learn to teach yoga. And I don't know, with the one we did over the summer, it was 50 hours and they're all teaching yoga and they're 15-year-old girls. So I think it's just about kind of unveiling it and stripping it back and making it more welcoming. Because I haven't always found it welcoming, if I'm being completely honest. If anything, I found it quite intimidating at times.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so we're gonna take a break, but when we come back, we're gonna expand into all these other areas that caused me so much fascination recently on another chat with Jordan. So we'll be back. Hi, Dr. Linda here. Many of you know that the mothership website of this podcast is called The Goodness Exchange, and there you can find articles, a video library, podcast, and content collections that point to what's right with the world. You can visit every day and you'll find the antidote to all the negative noise out there in the world. Okay, that solves the problem in our personal lives. We can choose what to give our attention to every morning and end our day with something positive. But what about our work environments? We need to feel supported and come alive in those cultures. But that's becoming harder and harder when most of us go to virtual work. And many of us who are working with others still never have shared positive experiences with our colleagues. By definition, culture comes from shared experience. So employees find it harder and harder every day to create an environment that attracts and retains other great people. Well, enter the Goodness Exchange and our extraordinary content, which celebrates an enormous wave of goodness and progress well underway in the world that almost no one knows enough about yet. My team and I at the Goodness Exchange are making certain that employees of optimistic, values-driven companies have instant access to the positive news out there today, because science is telling us that it's time to start celebrating what's right with the world. And here's the thing, there are so many positive stories out there about astounding solutions to some of our world's biggest problems, about wonders and leaps in human potential. But most are going completely uncelebrated. Your culture can change that and can be changed by a new focus on goodness and progress. In fact, with all that negative noise out there, your work culture can be infused by a sense of flourishing. People can be sharing ideas and swapping stories of wonderful, ingenious solutions around the water cooler again. With instant access to good news, employees can stay on their feet and take turns being the one who makes opportunity out of setback. People who use the Goodness Exchange every day have a spring in their step. They radiate joy and confidence and creativity because they know a far more complete picture of what's going on in the world. If you'd like to chat about infusing the culture where you work with a tone of celebration, of goodness, and innovation and progress, let's hop on a Zoom. You can introduce us to your HR director or your chief of culture. If used consistently, our content can give companies a way to turn something aspirational, like positivity, into a concrete way of being. Thanks. Talk to us at the Goodness Exchange about change and flourishing where you work. Okay, we're back. Hey, I am interviewing a wonderful person here today, Jordan Ashley, her story is the epitome of what is possible in all our futures when it comes to finding what we are uniquely built to contribute. Purpose, meaning, what our unique life experiences that have led us to be able to share with the world. So Jordan Ashley is an amazing woman who sorted out that she had a lot of the disparate skills to to take people on yoga travel experiences that are deeply immersive, but also do good in the communities that they're hosted in. So tell us about the places that you're going and what it actually means to the folks that are traveling and the locals.
So we go to places where girls' education isn't always a given. So oftentimes these are locations in the global south, be it Cambodia, Rwanda, Peru, Nicaragua, South Africa, just to name a couple of different destinations where we work with. And the whole idea is that, we're not staying at a resort and only going to the yoga shala. To me, the yoga practice is really just a portal in terms of cultivating and creating this kind of mass, mind and heart opening experience that you get through human connection. And so that's then created by engaging with people who actually live there and learning about their lives and learning about their stories and also learning about the history of the place, because I think it's so important to have some kind of context and some kind of idea of where you're going before you actually arrive, especially if it's an area that's post-conflict. And there's a lot of healing that's happening amongst the people that live there, because oftentimes in these places, you'll have a whole generation, if not generations, of survivors. And so I think it's a multisensory experience. I think you're able to open yourself up and be vulnerable through what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, and more so who you engage with.
I mean, you're doing some cultural sensitivity courses for the people that are going to be traveling ahead too. So I really love that aspect of it too, because not only is it responsible, Jordan, it also makes it possible for the traveler to more thoroughly engage. If you've been told ahead of time, don't do this, it means that, or always wait for this before you do that. Talk to us about the cultural sensitivity aspect of it, because I think that is freeing. And it's at the heart of creating great experiences for the traveler and the locals.
So we always give on the simple side of it, we give packing lists. So for instance, if you're going to Morocco, if you're going to Cambodia and you're visiting holy sites, in Cambodia, you would need to have your shoulders and your knees covered if you're going into any temples, Angkor Wat. And then in Morocco, depending on where we are, I always cover my head, even just in the souk, because I feel more comfortable. And so it's a couple of things people could bring with that we include. And then also, of course, to get more in depth with it, then it's also going through what's okay to ask and what's not okay to ask. And usually it's about letting people open up about their own experiences. For instance, in Cambodia and Rwanda, both locations that are post-genocide, where there are very much so survivors who make up a huge part of the population. One of the things that we have to go over, especially with Rwanda, is that the term Hutu and Tutsi are illegal. They've been illegal since 1999. You're not allowed to ask someone what their quote unquote ethnic group is, because it just doesn't exist. Everyone is just Rwandan. And so for a place like that in particular, there's a whole 10 bullet points that we go through, similar to Cambodia as well, in terms of seeing landmine survivors as well. And, just kind of, especially if we, depending on where we visit and who we speak with. But, if people want to share, they'll open up to tell their stories. But it's a matter of also, I would say, more about listening than it is about speaking. And then we also include reading lists as well. And like documentaries that people can watch as well, because some people are visual learners, or just things that they can watch just so that they have some idea what to expect.
Which is at the core of understanding the context of where you're at. I have by accident of birth, a great story of how my husband and I became citizens of the world, kind of started traveling, but we started out in a little farming town in Illinois, and it was accident of birth. My husband was a renowned basketball player. He captain at the University of Kentucky and played against Michael Jordan, and et cetera, et cetera. And that good fortune launched us into a world of global travel. So I can appreciate what you're talking about cultural sensitivity and how your trip must be so additive to people's lives all around. I just look at it and I can't believe what a win-win-win it seems to be. Like, you're very open about part of the travel cost is including a donation. Talk to us about that whole aspect of it.
So what I found in terms of getting people to donate is that if you include it and it doesn't feel like additional work, people don't even think about it. And so we include the $300 to $500 donation per person. Oftentimes people are like, oh, that's for the whole retreat, because you'll see other people say a percentage, but it's like, no, when you sign up, we include a $300 to $500 attached to you that then goes directly to whichever organization that we're visiting and that we're partnered with in that specific location. And then you get the letter as well, which of course is, an added bonus. But I think having it be embedded in the costing, I think makes it really simple in terms of not having to think about giving. It's already done. All of our teachers volunteer. So there's not really a ton of profit that's made off of these, if I'm just being completely honest, because the whole point of these trips is to fund these different projects on the ground. Because whatever additional revenue for a normal yoga retreat, that $300 to $500, maybe even more, that someone would retain, our whole goal is for that to go out. And so really it's just about covering the accommodations, and if we're working with a tour operator or a local guide, because we want to support the local economy, that's the whole point of doing this. That is honestly the bulk of it, if I'm just being completely transparent.
Yeah, it's lovely. I love your transparency. I want to go back to, my experience with travel and how it's related to your book list. I wasn't much of a reader before I started to travel. And once I started to read about places before I got there, I could understand everything I saw in context, the light of history. And it made it so much more meaningful. And I'm sure the charitable aspect of your situation, if people do the reading, is a whole different ballgame too, because we didn't get in the position we're in needing a charitable organization without the history that got us there.
I think so. I mean, also too, it's always great to see, maybe people will pick up books along the way, at local bookshops, and then I've noticed too, with some of these books, they're really popular, per destination. And so you'll pick up, I don't know, a used copy that someone, left behind at the secondhand bookshop. And then you'll see someone reading that in their downtime. And it's really nice to see, because it's okay, wow, this person is really trying to absorb from all angles and all possibilities, what they're experiencing.
That's just lovely. And these are small groups, right?
We keep them small. We keep them intimate, between 6 to 12, especially because we are visiting and working with, secondary age girls and visiting. So I never wanted it to feel like a tour bus or kind of saviorship, and that a bunch of random people are just kind of driving by for a photo walk. I think having a smaller group also lends itself to actually having to go back to this idea of connection, as opposed to being in a big group. And then there's lots of different cliques and specific people you might only have meals with or only explore with. So it keeps it consolidated into a nice pack of people.
Perfect. Now you're going to places like Peru, Rwanda, Cambodia. Tell me about the different projects that you support in each and how it works for the individual. Do people who are at the yoga retreat go to work with the girls? Describe how the experience would go.
So depending on where we are and what the itinerary is, because the other thing I've learned is that you can't replicate the same experience depending on, where you are. It has to be unique to the place that you're visiting. And so really honoring that and and allowing that to shine. So for instance, our Cambodia retreat is the most like volunteer heavy. I think there's about 6 different volunteering opportunities, and that's all of Ponheri Lee Foundation. So from teaching, yoga classes in the school with the primary school students, and then also doing a little bit more intense, like we did like chakra training with the girls at the dorm that they have as well. They have an amazing dormitory that's just like right around the corner from the guest house. And so that was our most like volunteer heavy in terms of having participants get really, really enmeshed. It's also one of our only retreats where we're not traveling all over the country, as opposed to Rwanda, as opposed to our upcoming retreat to Cape Town, which is February 18th to 25th. That's working with Lalela. So Lalela has female empowerment students, and they bring art to townships and uses art as a way to cultivate self-expression. And so that's a 2-day workshop that we have with those students. And so it's yoga and also an art project where the girls design their own life roadmaps and then pull out their individual strong suits as well. So it really depends, where we are, how much time we have. For the most part, like our Morocco retreat, we have lunch with them and do a yoga class, or maybe an art project. A couple years ago, a textile designer came, and so we did a natural dye workshop, and she fundraised and got a bunch of tote bags. And so it was really cool. It was actually with onion skins, and it makes the most like beautiful, like magenta color. And so while the bags were soaking, because the girls each, designed their own and did different like rubber band designs, they then did the yoga class. And so for the most part, I would say it's probably between like 1 to 3 sessions, but it just depends like where we are and who's available. Also too, oftentimes they're in school, so we need to work around their school schedule.
Mm-hmm. What are you doing in Peru?
In Peru, we work with the Sacred Valley Project. So that provides education and housing to young women from Indigenous backgrounds. And they were the first organization that we partnered with. And on that trip, we visited 2 of their dorms.
Do you hit Machu Picchu and the Sacred Valley itself?
We do. So we're actually like in the Sacred Valley. So with all of these trips, I feel like they're such special and unique locations. Like they're oftentimes just coincidentally bucket list destinations. So be it Angkor Wat in Cambodia or Machu Picchu in Peru, or in Rwanda, there's an option to go gorilla trekking as well. And so it's like these once in a lifetime experiences that you can have with us, all while supporting girls' education.
I just think you've come upon the recipe of the future, how we do good in the world and do good for ourselves at the same time. So how did you get this fearlessness about the world? Were you just born that way, or are you just supernaturally curious, or did you have can you talk about a defining moment?
I don't know if there's one moment. And if I did say something before and I've forgotten, but today, like, I can't think of like one specific moment. I think I didn't have a great...
My point is that, well, we hear so much about how all the things we should be afraid of out in the world and all the ugliness and, the world that I have drugged my kids through for 21 years has been full of beauty and wonder and people who don't have a lot being so incredibly ingenious and generous. But that's one of the reasons why I started the Goodness Exchange, because I knew we were never going to see that version of each other and humanity if we relied on the 24-hour news cycle. So what do you see out there that gets you inspired?
So for me, there's just so many possibilities. And that to me is like the most exciting thing of it all. It's like that kind of eternal wanderlust. And I always feel like I'm the best version of myself, which is funny when I'm like not at my house, when I'm not in London now, when I'm not in New York, when I'm not kind of stuck in my own way, when I have to be savvy and open and inquisitive about the place that I'm in and the people that I'm engaging with, because you kind of leave whatever, persona or whatever kind of identity that you think you have when you go somewhere else. For me, I become someone new, or a version of myself that maybe is just more open, I guess, because it's about breaking routine. And I think when we break our routine, then something really incredible happens. It's like all of the layers just immediately like come off, because we don't have to necessarily do the same things, go to the same, coffee shop or work, deal with any of the other kinds of, adulting responsibilities that we have. And so our guard is let down in like a really beautiful way.
Lovely. I was trying to imagine myself on one of your trips and thinking about the people I might meet, because, it would be a certain kind of person who would absolutely jump at the chance to go on one of your journeys with you. Tell me about the folks that really love these kind of trips. What, I bet you they're from all over the place and all kinds of backgrounds.
Yeah, I mean, definitely from all over the US and also, from Europe as well. And people from different walks of life, be it in their 20s and just finishing school, or maybe in their 50s and, just retired or wanting to change up their life in some way. And so it's really open to anyone and everyone.
Mhm.
Oftentimes people are like, oh, are they just for women? And I'm like, no, I want men to be a part of this. I want men to be a part of the conversation, because that's the only way that we're actually going to be able to create real waves of change. We have to get all of humanity, on board with elevating, girls' education. It can't just be the women who are doing it. It has to be the men as well. And so we have had men come, and I always think that's great, especially when they come on their own and they're not being taken with a partner as well. I mean, it's great if someone brings their partner, but I think there's something really cool when it's a guy who's like wanting to stand behind girls' education. Yeah, and what's so cool about it as well is people will come and they'll connect, and then they'll end up planning to go on the next retreat together. So we'll have like repeat participants who then coordinate, and that's been really great. And then they'll end up being roommates on the next trip, and that's happened a couple of. And so it's a really great group of people. I think because the higher purpose in all of this, it's like, yes, it's a holiday. Yes, it's about having an experience for yourself and having it be restorative. And my friend Eva wrote about it, and she said, putting the we back into wellness, like that's what we're all about. But at the end of it, it's also about supporting girls' education. And like, that's always been like the pinnacle of the whole thing. And like, that's the focal point. So you can do all of these wonderful things. You can take the amazing images and hide the cool things in like the marketplaces, and go to the museums and the art galleries, and have your whole world vision be completely shaped. And then at the end of it, you're actually leaving a tangible and permeable like impact as well.
I want to be helpful to your organization and to the folks that are listening to this podcast, and engage everybody, because it can be a win-win all the way around. What has to happen next in your view? What do you really wish would happen so that you could just break this thing open and take it to another level and get the girls' education that you're supporting all around an even bigger boost to support? What would have to happen? It's okay if you just need funding. That's okay. We can talk about it. Is that it? What else?
We need funding because we're a charity. So that's one of the big things that we do need. We do need, especially in terms of our on-the-ground yoga teacher training, because that's the only way we're going to be able to expand our programming. So currently, we're working with our partners in Rwanda and our partners in Morocco in terms of giving the skill set of yoga to their communities. And we've been asked by other organizations to do so, but unfortunately, just due to finances, like we haven't been able to expand outward. We need people to come on their trip. I know COVID was really scary and horrible, and no one wanted to travel for like multiple reasons, but the world is open again. And I think if not now in 2023, then when? So like, journey with us, like tell your friends, tell your families, spread the word, spread the good gospel about how you can actually like travel with purpose and give back to yourself while giving to others.
That's so lovely. All right. So one of the questions that I always like to wrap up with the folks that we interview is, you've learned a lot through this experience. We've all been through so much, but this sounds like you're a young woman. You have all running room ahead of you, and destinations and ideas and possibilities that we can't even imagine right now. But at the core, there's probably something that you say to yourself every day that you say, I really wish people knew what. Is there something you really wish people knew about the world out there, or what have you, whatever it is? What do you really wish people knew?
I really wish people knew not to be afraid.
I'm with you.
Yeah. I really wish people, because we'll get a lot of inquiries and questions about like the different places that we're visiting. And then, there's danger everywhere. The world is scary and the world is also beautiful. And so I'm all about leaning into the beautiful world and the kind world and the exciting world and the thrilling world, because if we're going to dwell on everything else, then we're never going to actually create any kind of momentum, and we're not going to be able to shift anything and change anything. And if not for our generation, then for the generation after. And so I think it's I think you need to leave fear out the door and leave it behind and pack your bags and go out there and like go see the world, because you will not be disappointed.
This is so true. Somebody laid this one on me the other day, which I think is relevant. It was a fabulous guest that we had on the podcast, and I will make sure that episode is referenced in the podcast. He makes very, very deliberate choices in his mind about whether he's making a decision based on fear and threat or love and opportunity. He literally asks himself, like, for instance, in the podcast interview, we used the example of when my kids were in college when the pandemic hit. We had a son who was a sophomore, and we had to decide whether to send him back during that first year or have him stuck in the woods here in Vermont with us for a year. And, I could have made that decision out of fear and said, no, you're not going back. Stay right here, or out of love and opportunity. It was very clear. Threat and fear versus love and opportunity. And of course, when we all sat down, we leaned on love and opportunity, and he went back and had a perfectly terrific year, and it was all fine. But so often we do make decisions based on fear and threat and versus love and opportunity. Talk to me about what you see in the lives of these girls or your guests, the people you take along with you related to that choice in life.
I think we take education for granted often. And I think when we take education for granted and that kind of access to it and how many doors it just automatically opens up, then that's a problem, because then it's disregarding so much of the rest of the world's population's like experiences. And so I think when you come from a place of like absolute humility and gratitude and recognition, especially, I grew up in California, like being born in the States, and then going to these different places and realizing that my life could have been completely different had I not had access to education. And education is something that can never be taken away from you. It's a constant. You'll have it forever. And giving that gift is priceless. And being able to support that, and through higher education, and now it's through yoga education, when they can choose what they want to do with it, if anything at all, even if it's just, to practice. They all love, in Morocco, all the girls love Billie Eilish. So even if it's just like doing their own classes and like listening to Billie Eilish, like that's cool and that's wonderful. And I love it. I'm here for it. But at the end of the day, I think it's what's really, not to sound like woo-woo, but I think that's what really opens up our hearts as humans, is when we're able to like really look at someone else who's from a completely different part of the world, someone who you would never meet had you not like gone on that plane or gone down that road or met in that cafe or, gone and visited that project. And it's through that kind of bonding and connection and sharing and finding our similarities. That's what makes humanity so human. It's through our similarities. It's not through our differences.
That is so true. And this choice between fear and love is always there. It is always there. And if we kind of go for our similarities, then you've got some love at the end of that path. That is a big promise of what you're doing in the world. And I'm so delighted to have shared what you're up to with everyone. The Trusting Love Over Fear is episode number 76 here at the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast with John Hagel. It's a lovely concept. And I think you're living in the life that exemplifies these constant choices we have. So thank you for loving the world so much.
Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to share. I feel very, very blessed and very humble. And thank you.
All right. Well, for everything that Jordan and I talked about, you'll be able to go to the Goodness Exchange website and actually into the podcast episode. It is teed up just like an article at the Goodness Exchange. If you're listening to at your favorite podcast outlet, Apple or Spotify, you're not going to be able to see the complete show notes. But what we've got there at the Goodness Exchange website for show notes for this episode and all the others is really expansive. And I really want you to understand everything that's going on with Jordan's project, because she is the future for us all in people who are social entrepreneurs and creating a future that we will all be proud and delighted to live in. So thank you, Jordan. I hope that all these connections to goodness and progress that we've shared carry you through your week, and you start finding the joy and wonder that Jordan and I have been talking about. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you.
Have a great day.